Hello, you guys. Thank you so much for coming to the channel. Well, the Pacific Northwest, we are having record pollen counts. So I am all stuffed up and my itchy eyes and scratchy throat from all this pollen. But, all of us Oregonians, we are walking around sneezing, wheezing, sniffing, but you can probably hear it. Hopefully it's not too much of a distraction. But today I have a remarkable lesson for us, and it came from a mystery I was seeking to get solved, and this is why Jesus called James and John sons of thunder. Have you ever wondered why he called those two gentlemen that? Well, it took me on a several-day journey to figure this out. Lots of trails, every one of them led to something absolutely remarkable. And so I'm going to share some of this study with you, but I'm telling you, it was very impacting to me. And so I'm hoping it has the same effect on you. But, Jesus has a purpose for everything he says and does. So we know he had to have a good reason for calling James and John sons of thunder in Mark 3:17. So we want to find out why. So we're going to go over some details of their lives. Their parents were Zebedee and Salome, and it's thought that Salome was a sister to Jesus's mother, making James, John, and Jesus cousins. If so, there's a good possibility that they were good friends while growing up. And so James, that's a Greek name for the Hebrew name Jacob. Yeah, so James's Hebrew name is Jacob. And you know what that means. That means heel catcher, supplanter. And I thought this was interesting. This is something else I found in when I studied, but it also means to restrain, as if holding the heel. It means to swell up or swell out. Yeah, but I thought that was interesting, that it means to seize by the heel and restrain as if holding by the heel. Well, then John, we know the name John. I think Zebedee and Salome named him after Jonathan. Because think of this. Let's make a safe assumption. The sons of thunder were twins. So let's say, all right, Jacob comes out first, because he pulled on the heel of John. Jacob goes out first. And so we know from Scripture, God said, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. Well, we know that Zebedee and Salome wouldn't want to name their second twin Esau. So they're thinking, oh, who's the most loved? Well, Jonathan, David's best friend. So I think it's a safe assumption that we say that James and John were twins. Well, another interesting thing here, a detail, is that James was the first apostle to be killed, and John was the last apostle to die. And John was the only apostle to die from old age. And that detail is going to be really important a little bit later. Now that we know James, John, and Peter were the first three disciples to be called into the ministry, and Jesus called them at the exact same time. So let's read about that account of them being called. Jesus told Peter to throw his nets out to the other side, and we know Peter made a huge haul of fish after fishing all night and not really receiving anything. So in Luke 5:8, Peter fell down at Jesus' feet and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man, O Lord." For amazement had seized him and all his companions because of the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, son of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not fear. From now on, you will be catching men." Verse 11, when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. So now think about this. When Salome asked Jesus if her two sons could sit next to Jesus when he came into his kingdom, She was appealing to the covenant that Jonathan and David made before the Lord. Because here James and John had been, following Jesus, had been faithful disciples. Peter, James, and John were in that inner circle, so she's kind of thinking, okay, well, I named my son after patriarchs. So we can kind of see that she's appealing to that covenant. So here are the terms of that covenant in 1 Samuel 23:17. Jonathan said to David, "Do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul my father will not find you. And you will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you. And Saul my father knows that also." So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. Well, when James, John, and their mother Salome submitted their request to Jesus, asking if they could sit by his side when he became king, Jesus wasn't mad. No, in fact, it demonstrated their faith in that covenant between Jonathan and David. It demonstrated their faith that they knew Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the king, and Jesus has a kingdom. So, Jesus, he was pleased. He got his disciples around him, and he told them, he gave them instructions on how to acquire the authority they desired. Because that's what that means. They're after authority. So, here's what Jesus said in Mark 9:35. Sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, "If anyone wants to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all." Well, isn't that interesting? John ended up being the last one and served them all. So now let's look at Mark 3:17, where it says, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brothers of James, Jesus, surnamed them Boanerges, which is the sons of thunder. Okay, well, Boanerges is of Chaldee origin, and it means young sons of commotion. That's interesting. It means violent, anger, rage. Well, we know that James and John were not violent, or they didn't have anger issues, and they didn't have rage. So, but maybe making some commotion. Yeah, we can see that happening. And the word thunder, well, that's Greek, bronti. It means to roar. Thunder, thundering peals. Oh, now we're getting somewhere. Just let your mind go to the peals of thunder in the book of Revelation. But now, here's where I want to start connecting some of the dots. John is a type and shadow of the remnant who will endure all 7 years of the tribulation, just like Jonathan, who also endured to the very end of the beast government. However, the remnant will all enter into Christ's millennial reign and live to a ripe old age. This is why John had to die of old age and not be martyred like the other apostles. It's because his life was prophesying of the remnant. This is why Jesus said to Peter in John 21:22, "If I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you?" Now, Peter, James, and John were the three who experienced the most together with Christ. They were in on everything. They heard more, saw more, wondered more. They probably made more mistakes, but they probably had, the most exciting walk with Christ during Christ's 3.5-year ministry, because they were in on so much of what Jesus did. Excuse me. When John, who represents the remnant, was receiving the book of Revelation, James and Peter were already at home with the Lord. John lived and ministered to all for many, many years without his dearest companions after Christ's crucifixion. When John was receiving the book of Revelation, he was viewing the entire 7 years of Daniel's 70th week. The revelation had to be given to the apostle that foreshadowed the remnant, a person who would survive and endure all 7 years, beginning to end. And again, the remnant will all enter into the millennium and live out the rest of their lives to a ripe old age and die of natural causes. Now, throughout the entire revelation that John received, there were 2 main angels engaging with John and showing him the things that would take place. They were such glorious-looking angels that at a certain point, John actually fell down and started worshiping them. Let's read of that. One of the angels' interactions with John was in Revelation 19:9. Then he said to me, so the angel said to John, "Write, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb." And he said to me, "These are true words of God." So that's interesting. The angel was blessing those who were invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. Well, that's the remnant. The angel was actually blessing John. John didn't know at the time that he represented the remnant. And it also says here, and Angeline brought a really good point in our study when I presented this to our group. And she was saying that, a lot of pastors are teaching that the book of Revelation and many other passages of Scripture, like Genesis, that they are allegorical. And right here, Revelation 19:9, the angel is saying, these are true words of God. In other words, these are not allegorical. So then, Revelation 19:10, it says, "Then I fell at his feet to worship him. But he said to me, 'Do not do that. I am a fellow servant of yours and your brethren who hold the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy.'" Well, the second similar encounter between John and an angel happens in Revelation 22:8. Last chapter of the Bible. "I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things. And when I heard and saw, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who showed me these things. But he said to me, 'Do not do that. I am a fellow servant of yours and of your brethren, the prophets, and of those who heed the words of this book. Worship God.'" So now, are you ready for this? The angel who just said that angel in Revelation 22:8 and 9. That angel that was speaking to John was his dear brother, James, in his eternal state. John's brother, James, was showing John around heaven. James, who had been taken away from them so many, many years before. Now, of course, John didn't know that. And the angel in Revelation 19:10 was Peter. Yep. So John didn't recognize them in their eternal state. But Jesus was providing the 3 dear apostles with one more thrilling adventure together in him. Their lives, James, Peter, and John, are prophetic. James represents the bride removed from earth at pre-trib, the first to be removed. Peter represents the church, who will be removed from earth at mid-trib. And John represents the remnant, who will be alive and remain on earth to view Christ's second coming. This also reveals why Jesus only changed the names of these 3 disciples. It's because you need a new name to be in heaven. Revelation 2:17, to him who overcomes, to him I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone and a new name written on the stone. So you see, I believe John's spirit was translated to heaven and then put right back down in his body on earth. Although John didn't recognize Peter and James in their eternal states as they were showing him around heaven and all these visions and all these things that were going to happen and all these other angels ministering, they knew exactly who they were showing off heaven to. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, that's all I'm going to share on this for now, but we've got some more things to learn about this. Thank you for watching. Bye.